just came across some very interesting footage, high-resolution video of stars up close that look completely different than how NASA commonly presents these stars. Let's check out this footage. Let me know what you guys think. All right, look at that. That's just amazing to me. This is actually sort of what I saw, but it was very difficult to see back then. I'll show you some footage I had from 2.5 years ago. Let's see here. There was some that was kind of good. Actually, even that one wasn't that good. There was one up here that was really good. I think this was it. This one you can kind of see, but it's still blurry, you know? You can't really tell what's going on, but you can see that there's some sort of legs or frequencies going on and like different circles within the star.
This one is called the Welle pulsar, and it's magnificent. It's a highly magnetized neutron star. And as it is oscillating, you can see what's happening. It's shooting a radio frequency out of itself. When they aimed the radio telescopes at the Welle pulsar, this is what they heard. And this is what this guy does 24/7, day and night, 365 days a year. The Welle pulsar sounds like right now. This is it. Listen to this. Now, I don't know about you, but that blew me away. I'm thinking, wow, this is incredible.
The film you're about to see has no characters. If you spare a little of your imagination, it is a film to describe to you the effect of cymatic frequencies on matter.
Yeah, I think this is pretty funny because I actually used this exact same footage for another video I did as well. This is from Alpha and Omega Productions. I would recommend subscribing to their channel. Actually, I had it subscribed on another one. I have 4 accounts that I watch videos from, but apparently I didn't subscribe from this one yet. So this is a really good channel. I just came across it last night, and he's got a lot of interesting videos, so I would recommend going and checking him out. But he's saying basically he thinks this is frequency based, which I would agree. It does seem to look like it has something to do with frequency. In what mode or manner, that's the question. All right, let's just check out some more footage here.
Singing. The stars are singing to him. I recently stumbled on 47 Tuc. It's a beautiful cluster of stars. Let's show you the picture. I recently stumbled on 47.
It looks like a donut, man. I mean, does that look like a star to you? Obviously, this isn't just some, some sort of wind or, atmospheric disturbance.
Tuc, it's a beautiful cluster of stars. That was a little out of tune. Beautiful. Who knew? God has his own string section.
All right, so basically, he's referring to a verse I was showing at the beginning of this video. Let's see here. Where was it at? I think it was here. It says that the morning stars sang together. So it's interesting, because science tells us that these are like our sun, but very far away. Yet, you can tell there they don't look anything like our sun. Another question also is the fact that, they talk about redshift as proving these stars are going away from us. That actually also is an effect that happens when light goes through a crystalline structure such as a celestial dome. The same exact diffusers that are required for a rainbow can also be used to make redshift with stars, which would indicate instead of the stars moving away from us, in reality, it's also a proof, or could be an alternative proof, for a glass dome or some sort of glass structure or ice structure above us. There is some sort of crystalline structure between us and the sun above us. Whether it be around the sun or around in the atmosphere above us, I think with the fact that we have sprites and a few other effects, it makes it very clear it's probably at the Kármán line. Let me just show you some footage from my previous video and you'll see what I'm getting at. All right. It's almost like it looks like it's alive. I mean, it looks like there's something going on there, It looks almost like something electric going on there. I don't know if that's just an effect, through our atmosphere or what, but it's very interesting. It doesn't look anything like these. So, I just thought I'd show those two things right off the bat. Then you got things like this. I'm just going through and just kind of going over some evidences. Impossible radio transmissions in 1915 where essentially the entire world could hear a transmission. That was before satellites, obviously. Okay. First transmission of the BBC Empire Service was broadcast on the 19th of December 1932 from this building. And it shows here basically all the places it could hear. Okay, 1915, Arlington, Virginia. They're able to hear this message, this transmission, in Europe, Hawaii, which is basically impossible, okay, without satellites, allegedly. Allegedly without satellites. So it's kind of curious why they were able to do that. It kind of defies heliocentrism, considering that we're allegedly on a convex ball. There's no way for those radio transmissions going in a straight line to curve around the Earth, right? And even if you have the bounce effect that they allegedly, they don't even explain that right. Even if you take into consideration like AM radio and the bounce effect and all this type of stuff, and other types of frequencies that can bounce off the alleged ionosphere, which is another quandary right there. How does it bounce off this mysterious ionosphere? Why does everything bounce off this ionosphere? The Kármán line, where sprites are, that just seem to make some sort of halo effect when they hit it, like as if there's a barrier there. Why do radio transmissions bounce off it? Well, it's because it's a different atmosphere. It doesn't really make sense. Why does it actually look like there's something physically there from the ISS, the International Space Station, which I think is, a lot of people are like, well, the ISS don't exist. I actually think it does exist. I just think you can't live on it. Okay, I think they actually put something up really high up, like they did, about 260 miles up, and I don't think you can live on it. I think it's because it's impossible with the temperatures at that height. The radiation is extremely intense, and basically it's uninhabitable for humans. But I think they could actually have some equipment up there and something somehow up at that height, 260 miles. Maybe at one time they were able to sustain life for a short period of time, and maybe it failed quickly. I don't know. But the fact that they fake a lot of their footage from the alleged International Space Station, it makes me realize that obviously it must have failed. Now, a lot of people just think it's all VR, but I don't think so. If they were going to VR it, they wouldn't show some mysterious line at the Kármán line. I mean, you'd want to just make it look invisible, as if there's nothing there, because that would, basically be good apologetics for their, there's nothing there. There's nothing at the Kármán line, even though everything bounces off it, and even though we have polarization of the sun through something, so that you only need one polarizer to make a rainbow when you can't do it in your house with a natural light in your house. It's kind of funny, actually. So there's like a lot of things that don't make sense. There obviously has to be something above us, some sort of dome, for there to be a rainbow with just one polarizer, raindrops. If you take raindrops and you take mist and spray it in your house with just a normal light in your house, like a light bulb, you won't get a rainbow unless you're looking through a mirror, because the mirror is the second polarizer. You have to have some sort of crystalline structures above us for there to be polarized light coming in. Then there's this. The Gegenschein. I guess that's a German word. This is very interesting, okay? This right here doesn't make any sense. Why does this make no sense? Okay, here's the question. How can you have a lunar eclipse in front of a Gegenschein when it lights up the sky when no moon is present? So, if there's no moon present here, it lights up the sky as you see. But if there's a moon here, you'll have a lunar eclipse. How does it darken like this? How does it darken the moon, yet when the moon's not there, it actually lightens the sky? So it lightens the sky when the moon's not there, but when the moon's there, it darkens the sky, or darkens the moon at least. Doesn't make any sense. The fact that the sky is lighted up says there's a light source there. And if we were in a heliocentric universe, you wouldn't have the moon being dark there, is the point. So they actually can't explain that. There's actually a lot of stuff like this they can't explain. Another example is, you see, when there's solar eclipses, when there's lunar eclipses, heliocentrism doesn't make sense. The Ηιgh effect. It's an anomalous behavior of pendulums and gravimeters, which happens during solar eclipses. Okay, it's first reported an anomalous precession of the plane of oscillation of a pendulum for the solar eclipse June 30th, 1954, by Maurice Allais, a French polymath who went to win the Nobel Prize in Economics. He reported another observation of the effect during a solar eclipse in 1959, October 2nd, 1959. So basically, this Foucault pendulum allegedly follows the rotation of the Earth. In actuality, I think what happens is it actually follows the electromagnetic behavior of the Earth and the sky that's rotating above us. Okay, so in reality, I think this oscillation is a result of the heavens above us moving while the Earth is stationary. And when you have a lunar and solar eclipse, you have odd things happening because the electromagnetic behavior is tied into the sun and the moon. So when they somehow get in the way of each other, it actually causes things to go a little haywire. And that's what's happening with the pendulum, the Foucault pendulum, during a solar eclipses. It changes its direction. Whoa, that means the Earth's changing its rotation. All of a sudden it changes its rotation out of nowhere when there's a solar eclipse. Does that make sense to you? Do you think the Earth, if you imagine the Earth being a convex ball the size it is, and if you know anything about mass and velocity, mass times velocity, momentum, it's called the conservation of momentum. When you got a semi-truck coming at you while you're standing in the middle of the road, guess what's going to happen? Okay, even if it tries to stop, it has a hard time stopping because of conservation of momentum. If you can imagine the Earth being the size it is, the Earth is going to fall up into pieces if you somehow change the rotation on a dime. it would probably break into pieces, many pieces, if we were in this heliocentric universe as they claim. But for some reason, the Foucault pendulum changes its rotation during solar eclipses, which is impossible if it's allegedly based on the spin of the Earth. So I think it actually proves, or actually it proves that it's not true. There's a lot of anomalies like this. We got more. There's even eclipses that are impossible, where you can see them in a certain place that's impossible to see them. I did that on another video. I don't want to get into that right here, but there is actually places where you'll see eclipses that are impossible. You're not supposed to be able to see them. Okay, sprites lightning. Okay, you see this here? This is actually showing what occurs. You have sort of lightning between the clouds and something above. Now, something sort of like a glass sheet could easily cause static like this. And you see how it has this halo around it. When it shoots up, it makes a halo as if it's hitting a barrier. Why is it at about 100 kilometers up, the temperature just goes crazy? You see how much it goes up? It just goes up insane levels. It goes up to an insane level. Why does the temperature extremely change at 100 kilometers? Why is it we see something that's allegedly not there? Why is it that two polarizers are required to make a rainbow, yet we only require one raindrops when you go outside? What's going on here? Why do sprites make halos in the sky? You see what I'm getting at? All these things do not make sense unless there's something physically above us. And that begs the question of, well, why would they call themselves Operation Fishbowl? As if we're in a fishbowl and we're trying to get out of a fishbowl. There's something above us we're trying to break through. Why would they detonate nukes up extremely high in altitude for no reason whatsoever and then call it fishbowl? Are we trying to break out of something? Are we trying to break through something? You see what I'm getting at? No, you're just crazy. This is just all, circumstantial. It just, there's nothing here. Even though I just pointed out 8 different things that all seem to point to the same thing. Just all completely circumstantial. You're just crazy. And NASA tells the truth all the time. The other experiment was with a ferry on Canary Islands. The ferries between Tenerife and Gran Canaria sail quite often, so you can make a couple of experiments on one day. I used my binoculars, not too strong, 1035, and a tourist telescope fixed on a viewpoint. The experiment showed the same thing this guy you are arguing with said. When the chimneys of the Pharisees, when the chimneys of the ferries disappeared under the water, I used my binoculars. So in other words, with his eyesight, he looked at this ferry, and when the chimney had gone beneath the water horizon, okay, so it looked like it went over the horizon, as they claim, like, oh, it looks like the ship sailed over the horizon. So it actually went completely under the horizon at normal eyesight, is what he's saying. Okay, so he said it disappeared under the water. I used and then he pulled out his binoculars to look, and the ferry was there again. It popped up again. So in other words, when he looked with his plain sight, the ferry is over the horizon, as they claim. But then he took out his binoculars and looked at it, and there the ferry is. It didn't go over the horizon. You could see the bottom of the ferry. You could see the entire ferry. When it disappeared in my binoculars, so it was continuing to sail away from him. So now he's looking through his binoculars until it disappeared with his binoculars. I switched over to the telescope immediately, and the ferry appeared in its entirety again. So in other words, every time you got a stronger magnification, the ferry's back there again in front of you. It didn't go over the horizon. So in other words, it's an optical illusion, which is what I've been saying all this time. And I'm going to show some footage in this video too, so you'll see what I'm talking about. This clearly shows that there's something going on with bending light, and that your eye follows the curvature of the bending light, and that's why it looks like something goes over the horizon when it really doesn't. So there's actually a number of things. I could actually go over several more things. I've did a number of videos covering these type of topics in the past about like the moon landing, just a lot of stuff. I've done numerous videos basically showing lots of anomalies and inconsistencies with what they claim is actually happening. And you can see here, obviously, if you have these solar eclipses, it causes sort of a problem for the Foucault pendulum. And of course, you have these stars that don't look anything like they're supposed to. I mean, look at this. This is just crazy. That looks literally nothing like what it's supposed to look like. And I think it's very interesting that it has these wave patterns on it, sort of an oscillation pattern, because that seems to also fit this whole electromagnetic universe type of theory, which is something I've also covered in the past. You can see here a quote from Nikola Tesla, if I can show it. Here we go. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Note that most of his works were destroyed, and they apparently silenced him and instead propped up Einstein, which, again, I did a video debunking part of Einstein's theory of relativity with an obscure experiment called the Sagnac experiment, which actually proves that there's an ether, and that some of the assumptions for the Michelson-Morley experiment were incorrect, so that their conclusions were incorrect. Matter of fact, the conclusions they got off the Michelson-Morley experiment were because they had false assumptions, and then Einstein's theory of relativity was there to explain away the results of the Michelson-Morley experiment. And then Sagnac came along and did his experiment, which debunked Einstein's theory of relativity. After that, they were like, oh, let's just hide the Sagnac experiment and let's just prop up Einstein and teach that in schools.
In 1913, Sagnac carried out a simple experiment of passing light in opposite directions around a table and recombining them. This produced interference fringes. He then rotated the whole table at 2 revolutions per second and found that the fringes changed. This result has very significant implications in science. It works as follows. A beam of light leaves the light source at the bottom left-hand corner and is split into 2 different beams, which we have coloured red and blue just to distinguish them. They travel round the circuit in opposite directions until they eventually reach the splitter, which also recombines them. There, they then go on to the photographic plate, where they have interference fringes. In this simplified version, we see that the beam is split into 2, the red and the blue again, and they go round the circuit and are recombined at the splitter and recombining prism, so that they again produce the fringes on the photographic plate. Now let us rotate the table. Before we do so, there is the very important subject of the effect of the ether. The Michelson-Morley experiment failed to detect the 30 kilometers per second motion of the Earth through the ether. So to overcome this problem, Einstein simply abolished the ether in his relativity theory. The very significant result of the Sagnac experiment was that it proved that the ether existed. Let us see how it did this. It is a fundamental feature of relativity that it claims that as there is no ether, light travels away from a source at the same speed relative to the source, whether the source is moving or not. Thus, whether the table is turning or not, the fringe patterns should stay the same. But if the ether exists, once the light has left the source, the speed of the light is controlled by the ether independent of the speed of the table, mirrors, etc., as we see here. So let us see what happens when we rotate the table. Here the light is split and the red and blue lights go in opposite directions. But notice that the left-hand mirror has moved around in such a direction that the distance the red light has to travel is further. Now in relativity, the same time should be taken because the splitter is also moving and the distance between them is the same. But now imagine that the ether exists and the speed of the light is controlled by the stationary ether. Imagine the ether like a thick treacle that limits how fast the light can travel independent of the motion of the light source, the splitter, or the mirrors. The result is that the red light takes longer to reach the left-hand mirror. Similarly, the right-hand mirror is coming towards the blue light, so it reaches the mirror quicker. After they change ends, the red light again takes longer to reach the recombiner, whilst the blue light gets there quicker again. So they reach the photographic plate with a delay between them, and this changes the fringe pattern. In fact, Ηιgh, using the speed of the rotation of the table, calculated how much the fringes should change, and found that they did change by just that amount. The crucial feature of this experiment is that it demonstrates that the ether does exist, which demolishes relativity. How does the scientific establishment deal with this result? By muddying the waters with scientific gobbledygook. Wikipedia says, in the above discussion, the rotation mentioned is a rotation with respect to an inertial reference frame. Since this experiment does not involve a relativistic velocity, the same wording is valid both in the context of classical electrodynamics and special relativity. How on earth can it be valid in both theories? It clearly proves that the ether exists because the speed of the light is controlled by the ether independent of the rotating table and mirrors. This Ηιgh effect is used by airlines for their compass directions. As the plane turns, the change in the fringes are translated into a change in the direction of the plane that then registers on the cockpit compass. In addition, I have received comments from 2 scientists complaining that they were never taught about the Ηιgh experiment. The first said, after 35 years as a professional physicist with a thesis in relativity, I only learned of Ηigh's experiment last year. Another correspondent complained that his professors never mentioned these important experiments. Dear Mr. Bowden, thank you for your enjoyable and well-written website. I've enjoyed visiting there today. I was especially interested in your comments on geocentricity, which, as noted, are controversial. The amazing thing is that none of the experiments cited were ever discussed in my undergraduate education, nor the implications cited. All my life I have heard the story of how Copernicus's theory came to prevail. I would have thought that major experimental evidence, already in existence, and calling the theory into question, would have at least been cited. One feels cheated as a student, of course, to keep finding 25 years later these bodies of contrarian evidence that never are mentioned in the classroom unless a student has already researched the topics and brings them up. Yet again, we have the suppression of scientific evidence that supports creation and geocentricity.
Wanted to explain why
the Sagnac experiment actually proves that we are on a stationary Earth. Okay, now I have a mechanical engineering background, so I'm quite well versed in a lot of different scientific theories and mathematics. Statics, dynamics, thermodynamics, vibrations, mechanics of materials. I took all manner of stuff like this. Thermodynamic, I actually studied power plant technology, and I was actually thinking about becoming an aerospace engineer when I first started engineering. So I sort of have some background in this. Now, what I wanted to point out was with the Sagnac experiment, you see a rotating table, and the beams of light at first, before it's rotating, are sent forth, and they come back, they split and come back together, and they combine and show to be exactly combining on the same wavelength. Okay, now when this table is spinned, then what happens is that the wavelength are not combining at the exact same spot again, which shows that one of the beams of light is not going the same speed as the other one. Now, the whole theory of relativity was to explain away the problem or the problematic results of the Michelson-Morley experiment. The Michelson-Morley experiment was essentially similar to the Sagnac experiment, except for without a spinning table. What they did is they assumed this. They assumed that we are in a heliocentric universe, that the Earth is going around the sun, and that light is, traveling within this system in an ether, and that this ether is moving past us. So they believed that this was their assumption with the Michelson-Morley experiment. They are assuming that the sun is moving through the universe, and that the Earth is revolving around the sun as the sun moves through the universe. And they're assuming that ether is stationary and that the sun is moving through this while the Earth is rotating around the sun. So they were figuring that at a certain specified point, you would have the light going with the ether, and then also you would have light going perpendicular to the ether, and that they could measure this difference and show that indeed there is an ether, and that with the assumption that the sun is moving through this ether. You understand what I'm saying now? So, but then when they did their experiment, they detected no ether. They're like, oh man, that's really shocking. What's going on here? And of course, some years later, Einstein goes, well, it's because there is no ether. Okay, but see, actually he was incorrect. Einstein was incorrect because the Sagnac experiment proves there is an ether. Okay, so what was going on is their assumption that the sun is moving through this universe, through the stationary ether, while the Earth is rotating around it, is an incorrect assumption. So they already assumed, they approved that the sun is moving through the universe and the Earth is rotating around. They already thought they thoroughly proved this, so they weren't even going to question that. They're only going to question the ether. You see what I'm getting at? But in reality, the Sagnac experiment proves there's an ether, because when they did the rotation on the table, the light, when it split and recombined, it wasn't at the same wavelength. One of the light sources from the split was slower than the other one, which is impossible if Einstein was correct. If you have a spinning table and you have the light splitting and recombining together, according to the theory of relativity, they should always remain the same and combine at the exact same wavelength, because they should be going the exact same speed, because the speed of light is always constant according to Einstein, even if you are moving. If you have a non-accelerating pace, if you're moving through the universe at some specified velocity, then the light that you measure is going to be the same no matter what, whether you're going with the light, or you're going against the light, or whatever. The light source is going to be the same speed no matter what. This is what the theory of relativity says. Okay? But you can see Sagnak's experiment disproved Einstein, his assumption that there is no ether. And actually what it does prove is that they should have been questioning that the Earth was revolving around the sun going through the universe, the sun going through the universe, through the alleged stationary ether. So their two assumptions were that there was the sun moving through the universe with the Earth rotating around. That's assumption one. And the assumption two was there's a stationary ether. And they thought they had a problem because they didn't detect any ether. Well, the problem was their first assumption, not their second assumption. Their second assumption is what Einstein allegedly debunked, but actually he's been debunked by the Sagnac experiment, which proves that it was actually the first assumption that was incorrect. The first assumption being that the sun's moving through the universe and the Earth's rotating around it. So actually they just debunked it if they actually look at the data and they used logic and rationally look through it. But you know what happens is they never teach the Sagnac experiment in the classroom. Why? Because it causes problems like the one I just addressed. And actually, if you use clear logic, it proves that the sun is not moving through the universe as they claim, which disproves heliocentrism, but they can't go there. Because then that would mean everything they've been teaching is a lie about that stuff, wouldn't it? Yes, it would.
When I was talking with the gentleman from Belcom, and we were discussing the lie, everything he was telling me was different from what we were being told was the truth. And at one point I asked him, I said, man, you guys, you lied about a lot, didn't you? And instantly he said, no, we didn't lie about certain things. We lied about everything. None of it was true.